Thyroid gland is one of the trickiest things to work with and treat because most people treat just the thyroid gland. They don't figure out what made the thyroid respond the way that it did. You can't treat the thyroid without figuring out what's going on with the adrenals and vice versa. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Jacque Show. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that I have been talking a lot about on TikTok, a lot about on just all social media platforms, and it has been a minute since I've talked about mold toxicity. So I'm going to dive into this today because a lot of people, again, on TikTok, I did the video of the podcast about thyroid health, but when we understand thyroid health, we understand autoimmune conditions. Remember that we're not born that way. Okay, we don't come out of the womb with Hashimoto's. We don't come out of the womb with Graves' disease or ulcerative colitis or fill in a blank with an autoimmune disease, right? So diet and lifestyle has to influence that. All disease in the body starts with inflammation. You can't have disease without inflammation. It's absolutely impossible. So we first have to address where could there be an inflammatory stressor, right? Is it just your emotional stress, what you perceive of stress? Is it like, hey, I'm stressed out about being able to get all my stuff done today? Am I stressed about my kids, my wife, my husband? Am I stressed about traffic? Am I stressed about getting somewhere on time? Or is it, hey, do I have an internal stress where I have an infection, candida yeast parasite, bacteria? Or do I have mycotoxins, which we'll talk about today, in my body that's causing a dysregulation of my immune system? And then, on top of that, so we talked about the mental, the spiritual aspect of things, the mental. We talked about the physical, okay, so the internal, really. And then also physical trauma. Are we causing too much stress with our workouts? Are we causing too much stress because we're physically being abused? Are we asking too much of our bodies and our bodies can't recover? All of those things, okay, and going back into thyroid health, like when the hell is any of my doctors going to test or talk to me about any of that? They don't, because they don't have the time for it. They're just quick to treat. So I want to first talk about the severity of mold toxicity, okay? Pardon me for not looking up the percentage, but if I remember correctly, I think it was Dr. Mark Hyman, that was saying, I think over 50% of buildings now are water damaged buildings, which means at some point, there's a structural issue which allowed for moisture to get into the building to then grow something like mold, right? So water damage means water feeds the mold. Mold is allowed to grow. Mold needs a couple things. It needs a humid climate, okay? It needs some wood, something to eat, and it needs some moisture. So keep feeding that moisture and you're going to get yourself some mold. Pretty easy recipe. Works 60% of the time, every time. I don't think that makes sense. But really, realistically, okay, if you put all those ingredients together, you're typically going to be growing some mold, right? And it's not good for you. Not in any concentration is mold good for you. There could be considered common indoor molds if you wish, but with common indoor molds, they still require a moisture source, right? And if you have a moisture source, then if we don't turn that faucet off of moisture or water getting into our home, then other molds are going to grow. It's going to lead down a line, and Stachybotrys tartarum or black mold is going to require the most amount of moisture in order to grow. So what do we do here? Why is this a big topic? Why? Because I deal with it way more than I would like to. I am blessed that I know how to get mold toxicity out of people, and I know how to get people out of mold toxicity. But it's a stressful process to know that your brand new home has mold in it, or to know that this thing that you just renovated just had a roof leak and boom, you got mold throughout the house. Or you have a house from the 1900s that's just fallen apart, or you have a house in Pittsburgh that was right next to the river and the river's flood and the basement's flood and everything's wet, and it's just like, oh, we're just kind of used to that. Or with different podcasts that I've done with Ben Holt or Alexa Bowditch, that sex chick, they talk about Louisiana, and they're talking about how it just floods all the time. And you're like, well, the outlets are up a little bit higher. We just assume there's going to be mold. We're going to take care of it. We're going to remediate it and just move on with life. Well, I want to talk about the severity of that. Now, that's more out of convenience, right? Where it's like, I don't want to move. I don't want to do this stuff. It's a pain in the ass, and I know what I have to do. And this is not my first rodeo. We'll get this mold taken care of, and we'll be good, right? you become your own mold specialist, which is fine if you're good at it. But when we talk about other manners, where I know that I pulled this article up and talked about it a while ago, but I didn't know the exact date of when it was. I said a couple of years ago, and I was actually right. This was back in 2019. There was a hospital in Seattle that ended up closing down their doors, okay, in the one wing of the hospital due to mold infiltrating the HVAC system. All right, so if a hospital shut down due to mold toxicity, do you think mold might be dangerous? Yes or yes? Hospitals don't shut down for much. Maybe some terrorist threats, mold, or if like, hey, the roof fell off or the foundation, somebody bombed the foundation, the whole thing's falling off. And even still, they're like, well, we'll use the other wing because we don't want to lose out on money, right? For a hospital to shut down from mold toxicity says a lot about mold toxicity. Now you may be wondering, well, what was the mold? Was it black mold? Oh my gosh, was it black mold? Was that what it was? Is it the bad stuff? No, it wasn't. It was Aspergillus and penicillium. Aspergillus in particular can lead to a condition called aspergilloma, which is like a fungus tumor in your lungs. So what they were worried about was these patients who would be breathing in this Aspergillus mycotoxin. Aspergillus is a mold, but it would release mycotoxins, breathing that stuff in and then increasing their risk for a fungal tumor. They're like, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't have that in our hospitals, especially in the lung units where people can't breathe, the respiratory units where people can't breathe properly. Maybe we should hedge our bets and pull people away from that. But that brings me to my next point, right? We need oxygen in our body. You don't believe me? Hold your breath, see how well you do. You might be a really trained breathwork specialist and be able to hold it for a long time, but eventually you're going to have to take a breath. Otherwise, you're going to pass out, right? Oxygen is vitally important to us. Where there is a lack of oxygen, we get lactic acid. Lactic acid is inflammatory. You don't believe me? Go work out. You develop lactic acid. Your muscles are sore the next day. Maybe your joints are even sore the next day because you're just like knocking the rust off those joints. That inflammation, oh, did I say it? Yeah, that inflammation is going to be due to different levels of work. Well, when it comes to working out, it's going to be a deprivation of oxygen because those moments, a lot of movements, so they go anaerobic, they steal away that oxygen and you're left with lactic acid. Same thing happens. So if we have mold toxicity and it's going to damage our lungs, right? We have these ones, there's one called gliotoxin, which just like radically destroys lungs. A lot of people that I was working with who were like, hey, I think I got COVID. I'm like, no, you just moved into a building. You had super high gliotoxin. And I know for a fact that damages your lungs. So there you go. It decreases your oxygen transfer between your lungs and your body. So I'm going to try to keep this as easy to understand as possible. But think about that. You're starving yourself of oxygen due to mold exposure. So we starve ourselves from oxygen, we're creating lactic acid. In the presence of lactic acid is inflammation. And then we have that for a long period of time. Long period of time, we can't recover from it. We develop disease. Dis-ease, okay? And uneasiness of the body develops disease, which is what we try to label and treat with medications. Not we, but others, right? So they shut down his hospital. I think they did it twice. Even they shut down his hospital. It was on CNN, for goodness sake. So like it actually got picked up by mainstream news. Now I don't support CNN worth a dang. I think all news outlets are horrible at what they're doing to society. But that's my own whatever. I call myself apolitical. You can get mad at me one way or the other. I have my beliefs, and quite honestly, neither Democrat or Republican meshes either of those together. So I don't really care. Anyways. Politicalness aside, how then does mold convert into issues with the thyroid, right? Now, if we have mold exposure, they ran some tests. Now, there's a difference between causation and correlation. Correlation is like, yeah, I think there might be something like this may cause that. Causation is like, yes, if you go out in the sun and you get a sunburn, the sun caused your burn. That's more of a causation. Like, well, yeah, it's pretty obvious. That's what happens. This stuff is more like, okay, these people came in, okay? They came in and they were reporting with issues with their thyroid, Okay. And when they were reporting with issues with their thyroid, they were like, hey, I'm hypothyroid. And people were trying to give them Synthroid or levothyroxine, which if you don't know, it's only T4, which why that medication, just like statins, why that medication is even around is beyond me. I think it's so stupid to give just a T4 because it's an inactive hormone. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Anyways, so they were giving them Synthroid to start, and then realizing that when these people had exposure to mold toxicity, that's when these symptoms started to come about, and they actually switched the dose from T4 to actually T3, which is your active form of thyroid hormone. And they were like, oh, wow, I'm doing absolutely phenomenal. I have my energy back, my weight's down, I'm doing good, I'm good to go, right? So there is a correlation then between mold toxicity and having a decrease in conversion between your T4 to your T3. If you just load up on T4 and that's all you take is T4, 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 but then you're not converting it to T3, you're still going to be seen as having a hypo or a sluggish thyroid because you're not having any usable thyroid hormones. Okay. So let's take a look in a little bit deeper. So there's a couple of other case studies, case reports that were done. One in particular was schools. Now, when you're like, hey, we got water damaged buildings, listen, schools and churches are by far the two most neglected types of buildings that are out there. And my word, is mold running rampant. And quite honestly, most schools don't really care. They don't care. I know from experience because a patient was still trying to get her health under control, and she was living in, she lived in a moldy environment, but her school flooded all the time, and she would just deal with mold everywhere. And then they'd be like, hey, teachers, go clean it up. It's crazy. It's crazy when you think about it. So what these guys did, there was 30 teachers and 50 students from what they considered to be a mold-infested school building. Okay. And they had a huge prevalence of autoimmune conditions as well as malignancies. Okay. So cancers. So they had, the author claimed that the evidence showed an elevated incidence, and it was 47 times higher for lymphoma cancer and a 6-fold higher risk of breast cancer. Okay, so we're talking lymphoma, we're talking breast cancer. Makes you think a little bit. Now, I know we're talking about autoimmunity, but again, cancer is just an adaptation of the body. It's due to inflammation. How's your body going to respond? A lot of the times, autoimmunity is then a precursor for cancer. So we got one thing that was just going awry. We can't just neglect the fact that the inflammation is just going to run rampant through the body. It's not like when I smashed a hammer into my shin. I did that. There's inflammation there. I would be dumb to assume that the inflammation just stayed down in my shin. No, it's going to recirculate through the body. As long as I have proper blood flow, that inflammation is going to be washed out. New blood's going to come, new healing components, things like that, platelets, because Lord, do I have a big gash in my shin. New platelets are going to come. They're going to deposit down there. My subconscious is going to be able to take care of it. My innate intelligence is going to make sure that I'm good, I'm healed, I'm happy. So we have to really take a look at the data and say, okay, listen, like if this keeps happening, we're going now from correlation to causation. Okay, definite cause and effect. And what I'll tell people is like, listen, you just bought this house. Your health was fantastic. You moved into the house and you lost your health, or your kids start getting horribly sick, or you go on vacation. A lot of my patients go to Florida, go on vacation to Florida. You come back home. Florida, you were flourishing. You're doing absolutely fantastic. You're like, the vitamin D was amazing for me. Then you go back in your home and you have rashes that just break out all through the body, right? And another issue with autoimmunity is mold can also trigger things like vitiligo, which is an autoimmune condition. So I've seen patients have that happen due to mold exposure in their own home, okay? So again, we would be crazy to think that it's like, oh, it's only specific for these autoimmune conditions or only specific for these. No, we have different classifications of thyroid malfunction. We have our autoimmune thyroid disease, okay, AITD, autoimmune thyroid disease, okay? What this is going to show here is that autoimmune thyroid disease includes Hashimoto's and Graves' disease. And what we see is thyroid antibodies that go above the normal lab range or even close to it. If you have a bunch of antibodies being produced, we're like, hey, you have somebody that hasn't hit the clinical range yet, why would you wait to treat that and get those numbers down? What are we, a medical doctor? Anyways, so we would look to treat that as well and bring that down, but first find why that was happening, okay? these people that have that AITD, the autoimmune thyroid disease, are very, 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 very sensitive to mold toxicity. So it's really important to make sure we take a look into that, because if they have mold in their home or in their workplace, then it's going to cause an abnormal or dysregulation of the immune system, and the body will attack itself. And in this case, develop more issues with your thyroid, whether that is thyroid nodules or a goiter, whatever that might be, that has been linked to mold toxicity. Okay. The other thing here too is we have hypothyroidism and then subclinical hypothyroidism. Okay. So hypothyroid, it's quite honestly the most common thing that we see in practice when it is a thyroid issue. We see it a lot of the times. And quite honestly, we see a lot of hypothyroid with patients who also have mold exposure. They have mycotoxins in their body. So just from small case studies or clinical samples of patients that I've worked with, it's very rare to see a patient with mold toxicity that has a normal thyroid. Okay, usually it's slow. It can be fast, but usually slow. Okay. Now, what this will show is hypothyroid is without the antibodies. It doesn't have the autoimmune component to it, but we're looking for the functional lab ranges for the T4, the T3, reverse T3. Still want to see the antibodies just to make sure if you do have some on a retest, we want to see those antibodies drop back down. If you got like 10, 15 or whatever, I still want to see those come down, because we don't want to ever see autoimmunity numbers go up, ever. So if you got that type of thyroid issue, then you have non-thyroidal illness syndrome, or NTIS, okay, or euthyroid sick syndrome, ESS. Let's dive into that. So NTIS is defined as abnormal lab values that are actually normal in illness. It could be also described as normal thyroid function found in sick patients, okay? So this is where things get a little bit tricky. Thyroid gland is one of the trickiest things to work with and treat, because most people treat just the thyroid gland. They don't figure out what made the thyroid respond the way that it did. So if you listen to one of my previous podcasts when we talked about thyroid health, if we have an increased amount of stress, again, like we talked about at the beginning of this one, then your HPA axis is going to throw off your HPT axis, your thyroid axis. Okay, so they're going to be correlated. You can't have one without the other. You can't treat the thyroid without figuring out what's going on with the adrenals, and vice versa. Okay, you can't treat the adrenals. Even if you're like, hey, my thyroid numbers are perfect, you treat the adrenals, your thyroid numbers will be even more perfect than what they were before, because you're going to be a lot more efficient. You're going to have a lot less cortisol, a lot less stress, which means a lot less conversion from your T4 or T3 being into reverse T3, which is where stress comes into play. Now, the other thing here too is with these types of conditions, okay, we'll have normal T4, okay, and this is just illnesses aside. We'll see normal T4, okay, and then bottomed out T3. But if you just tested TSH and T4, it would look peachy. Like, you're good. You might have these symptoms, but that might be all in your head. Might just be you. But it's not. you know this. If you're like, hey, I'm cold, I'm losing my eyebrows on the corner of my eyebrows are starting to fall off, and I'm having trouble speaking, I'm having trouble or difficulty swallowing, I'm gaining a whole bunch of weight, and I feel this, I feel that. It's probably your thyroid, but why is your thyroid responding the way that it is? And are you not converting your T4 into T3? All right, because again, medical doctors are only going to test what they can medicate, okay? So we talked about already with the mold exposure leading to immune system dysregulation. So we don't really know the difference between our body and foreign invaders. So autoimmunity is when our body sees our body as a threat, so it goes after it. The other thing with mold that we talk about a lot with my patients is we get these conditions known as CIRS, C-I-R-S. It's chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which means you are chronically inflamed due to exposure from mold toxicity. Okay, so this happens. It happens all of the time. Most people with mold toxicity are going to have CIRS or a form of it. Okay, so one of the things that mold exposure can do is lead to lowering of your MSH production. MSH is melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH. Low levels of this hormone can lead to a widening of the tight gap junctions in our gut and lead to leaky gut. So that's going to make our intestines more permeable to bad things being able to slip out, therefore resulting in autoimmune condition. We see a lot of times leaky gut is found in autoimmune conditions here as well, or gut permeability, okay? So the other thing that we'll see is having low MSH can also lead to staph being located up in the nostrils, okay? So a lot of people with mold toxicity have issues with sinuses. allergies, so on and so forth. So it can lead to a condition known as MARCoNS, and that's an infection that releases toxins and exacerbates the inflammatory cycle. So we're talking about sinuses, we're talking about the throat, postnasal drip, what's around there, boom, the beautiful thyroid, right? So thyroid is super sensitive to the immune system function. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible here, but mold is known as a thyroid disruptor. It can destroy this gland just through and through, absolutely destroy it. And people who have have thyroid conditions are then also more sensitive to mold exposure. So it's kind of like what came first, was the thyroid dysfunctioning and then mold made it worse, or did the mold make the thyroid worse and then you're still in a moldy environment and it still continues to make the thyroid worse? There's a lot that ties into this, but the big overall generalized picture of this is when we talk about autoimmunity, we talk about thyroid, we talk about the health, we talk about all of these things in the body. And when it comes to mold, I tell this to all of my patients, mold hits the gambit of absolutely every disease under the sun can be caused from mold toxicity. And I'm going to stand by that as well, because I see it all of the time in practice. And it's these patients who they've been everywhere. They've been endocrinologists, they've been to any ologist out there, any specialist out there, but the specialist still can't figure out what the heck is going on in their body. And they come to me and I'm like, oh, it's mold. Let's test mold. Mold's through the roof, right? That's the easy part. Getting diagnosed and getting all of that stuff done, super easy. The difficult part is then allowing for the patient to understand what that's doing to their health, not just now, not just previously, but in the future. Because if you've got kids in the house, then we're talking about damage to the kids. Okay. Then we're talking about trying to find proper companies, which is, God, if you know of a good company, I know Angie Lee sent me a contact for a company as well. They travel around and do like analysis of homes, but I need to start developing or making connections with people who actually know what the hell they're doing when it comes to mold remediation, because I'm struggling. So if you know great mold remediation specialists, then by all means, please reach out to me. You could be in any state. I probably have patients in those states. Please help me to help my patients, because when we find out there's a boatload of mold in your body, there's a boatload of mold in your house, the worst thing in the world that can happen is some moron comes to the house and goes, I don't see anything. I don't know where it is. All right. I had one, and this isn't directed towards anybody, but I will use this example because it really upset me. And my patients know that, and they'll know that I'm talking about them. But they sent me over this report of this guy that came to their house and inspected everything. And like, all right, hey, we took pictures of the basement, got it down the basement. We're going to do this in the basement. How do you think that looks? And so my patients send that over to me because I'm like, hey, keep me in a loop. Let me know what these guys want to do, because I'll be able to tell if they're good or not. This is the first time in New York, New Jersey area where we've been working on treating mold in the home. So we get on the phone. I'm like, I gave my approval. Cool. And then the wife was like, hey, should we be concerned that they only tested the basement? I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, they just went down to the basement. I'm like, they didn't go anywhere else? They didn't go, like, you have a giant beam that was wet when it was installed. Like, they didn't go there. They didn't check upstairs. They didn't check the bathrooms. They didn't check the kitchen where there's water or the laundry room. Nothing. Not even the attic. Nothing. Nope. Nothing. Just went to the basement and told us what they were going to do. I'm like, oh. So that part is the hardest part by far whenever it comes to dealing with mold. It's almost easier for people to be like, hey, I'm going to sell the house or burn this thing down to the ground and collect insurance. I'm just joking. Please don't do that. And don't say that you heard it from me to do that. I'm just joking. But a lot of times it is easier to just up and move and get the heck out. Okay. So again, to answer the questions, can mold toxicity cause Hashimoto's or thyroid disease? Absolutely. All it needs to do is cause inflammation in the body, and just that would then allow for our body to have to adapt to that internal stress and that internal inflammation. We get that chronic inflammatory response, okay, that Sears condition that takes place, then that's going to allow for more inflammation. Then we're going to have the decrease in the MSH, which is then going to lead to gut permeability, which will then lead to autoimmune disease. Okay, so leaky gut and the thyroid have a huge connection there as well. So make sure that if you have been tested for thyroid and you don't know what the heck is going on with your thyroid, and your doctor just keeps trying to throw Synthroid at you or some other sort of medication at you, you have to make sure you get that underlying cause addressed. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly monitoring your dose for the rest of your life. Okay, so I'm going to sign off with that. Hopefully this was helpful. little bit passionate about this today. We'll dive more into this, but I wanted to do a little episode here on mold. We may even do a little mini series on just going through different molds and what they do to your body. So thanks as usual for tuning in. We'll chat next time.